Uh, all right. So my first question is how and why did you get into the space industry?
Yeah, I think I could trace it back to when I was a freshman at Notre Dame.
Okay.
And at Notre Dame, your freshman year, everybody's in what's called the freshman year of studies. You don't pick a major until your sophomore year.
Hmm.
So at the end of my freshman year, it's a long time ago, but it was 1981, and that April, the space shuttle flew for the first time. So I watched that space shuttle go up for the first time, and I was just like, and I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of that business, that industry, aerospace, either designing and building rockets or airplanes or, that kind of stuff. So I think that was really when I decided on my major, which was going to be aerospace engineering. Yeah.
Okay, and so that's your educational background. You got a,
Yeah, I got a bachelor's in aerospace engineering, and then I stayed on and got my master's in aerospace engineering before I went on to active duty in the Air Force.
okay. And how long were you in the Air Force for?
I was in the Air Force for 25 years. So yeah, I initially thought, oh, I'll just pay back my 4-year ROTC commitment and then go, work for one of those big aerospace companies. But in the Air Force, I got into flying. And so then I kind of thought that was fun. So I got to put my interest in flying together with my engineering background. Um, so I flew F-111s for a few years, and then I applied a couple times to the Air Force's test pilot school and got accepted to go to the test pilot school. So I went out to that at Edwards Air Force Base in California. And then coming out of test pilot school, I stayed at Edwards and I did flight test on the B-2 stealth bomber.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool, and a lot of fun. And so, like, this thing with the Air Force, it just kept going. Like they kept
Snowball.
letting me do all these things that I wanted to do, and it was a lot of fun and some pretty cool stuff. So I just, 25 years later, I retired. So
Yeah. So what made you want to leave the Air Force?
actually, at this time, I was selected as a NASA astronaut back in 2000. So I actually came on as an Air Force officer. So I did that for like 10 years, and then I had the opportunity just to transition to be a civil servant in the for NASA. So I did it basically so I could start getting my Air Force retirement and get my salary as a NASA civil servant. So um, it just kind of made sense financially at that point to I could retire and keep doing. I just came into work the next day, still doing the same
Yeah.
job as an astronaut. I actually flew once in space as an Air Force officer, and then once in space as a government civil servant.
Wow. That's really impressive. What do you do on a daily basis? What would your daily routine be?
Now or back when I was an astronaut,
Both.
or
Both, yeah.
well, well, as an astronaut, I was with NASA for almost 20 years, but I was only in space for 25 days. So most of that time is not flying in space, but there's a lot of, so initially there was just going through the training of, being trained on the space shuttle and the space station systems. And then you kind of graduate from your astronaut candidate status and now you're trained and you can be assigned to a mission. So when you get assigned to a mission, then you train with that crew for about a year. So there's a lot of training involved. Every day, the fun thing about it is that every day is different. So some days you're in the classroom, some days you're in the simulator, some days I was in the pool, training for spacewalks. Sometimes I'm out flying airplanes, the T-38s. So it was just kind of a lot of fun. The training was the best part of flying in space,
Yeah.
other
How,
than the mission.
what exactly consisted of your training? Did you like it? Was it, I mean, you said it was the best
It
part.
was it was fun. I mean, I think the funnest part for me was the going in the pool, the neutral buoyancy laboratory, and training underwater for spacewalks. You get to put on your spacesuit and float around in there, and you really feel like an astronaut when you're doing that. But like I said, every day was different. I mean, some days, you have to kind of start off with the academics, just like going through school. You get books and you have to read the books, and then you go to class and they teach you some stuff, and then you get into the simulators and you start applying that knowledge and practicing. Um, we'd start off with just single system trainers where they would just go through one thing at a time, like the electrical system or the hydraulic system or the environmental control system, or and then eventually you get into the simulator where they put all the systems together and they just kind of run the mission. So that was training, and then you get to go fly in space, and then that's kind of the icing on the cake. But when you're not training for a mission or flying in a mission, then you're in more of a support role. So we had it was more, you're more of an engineer then, going to meetings and just tracking different systems on the shuttle and the space station, and supporting the other astronauts who were in training and were flying. I mean, one of my jobs was to go down to Florida, and we would be like the last ones in the shuttle, and we would help the crews get strapped in, and then there's a bunch of stuff inside the shuttle that we had to take out before it launched, because we're up on we're in the vertical on the launch pad, and then when we land, we're like this, like an airplane. So it's weird because the back wall here then becomes the floor. So there's a bunch of panels that have to get taken off so we could stand on that back wall and not damage things. So and then after they landed, then we were the first ones to go back in through the hatch and help the astronauts get out, and then take over the vehicle, and then help power it down, and then get it over to the processing facility where they would turn it around to do it again for the next flight.
What would you say the hardest part of your job was?
For being an astronaut, I think the hardest part was the Russian language training.
Okay.
So I took about 5 years of Russian as we were preparing to, for the International Space Station missions. And I just personally found that Russian language training difficult. Yeah, it's a tough language. Yeah, and I'm not super good at languages anyway. So
Yeah, me neither. So I heard that you also worked on the Hubble telescope. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Tell me your part in that.
yeah, so the first mission that I flew in space was STS-125, and it was a Hubble servicing mission. It was the last Hubble servicing mission. It was actually just 15 years ago. I think we landed 15 years ago this weekend. It was in May of 2009. And so, yeah, I was a spacewalker, and went outside and actually went over to the Hubble telescope. We opened up the doors. I was inside the Hubble telescope up in space, and we were, replacing the cameras and spectrographs and the batteries and gyroscopes and everything that made the telescope work. The cool thing about Hubble is that it was designed to be serviced, to be worked on, to be maintained. So many 5 different times astronauts went up to service the Hubble telescope, and each time they would, it's kind of like, think about your phone, right? Every couple of years the camera's better, right? It's everything. So it's kind of like that with Hubble. So every few years they would develop a new, better camera that could see back farther into space. And so we were kind of just Maytag repairmen. We'd go up there with power tools and put in new cameras, take out the old ones, and all that kind of stuff. So it was really cool to be a part of that mission. And it's still up there. It's still working. So 15 years later, it's still going around the Earth once every 90 minutes and taking pretty awesome pictures. And a lot of astronomers and astrophysicists still, book time on the telescope and are still making discoveries today. So
Yeah. Well, how has that changed with the James Webb telescope, with the introduction of that one?
yeah, that's interesting. So James Webb, it's it's even bigger and better, and the Hubble telescope is in low Earth orbit, so it's just about 300 miles above the Earth, and it's going around in a low Earth orbit, right? The James Webb is out at 1,000,000 miles. It's out at one of the Lagrange points, so it's much deeper into space. And the idea is that it's colder and darker out there, and so it just has a better kind of background to operate. But the bad news is that it's not meant to be serviced, so it'll work as long as it works, and then when it doesn't work anymore, it's done. So different in that respect, but it has a much bigger mirror. It has much more greater capability than the Hubble telescope, and so it's making even more amazing discoveries every day. So, but I think they still work and complement each other. The good thing that the reason we put telescopes up in space is because it's above the Earth's atmosphere, so we're not looking through all that stuff, all the air and the molecules and the dust and everything. One of the cool things about being up in space is when you look out at the stars, they don't twinkle. They're just very crisp and clear. So that's what's good about putting a telescope above the Earth's atmosphere. Then you can avoid some of that pollution or whatever else you're looking through.
Yeah. So how has the space industry evolved since you've joined? Whether that be,
Wow. Yeah, it's been, I've been doing this for a long time. So I guess what's interesting now is what NASA's doing and what we call commercial space, that they've kind of, turned over some of the things in low Earth orbit, like the crew transportation. We don't use the space shuttle anymore. We've let, SpaceX and hopefully soon Boeing, Starliner will also, deliver the crews to the International Space Station. And so NASA doesn't own that vehicle anymore. It's more like a rental car model.
Yeah.
And so they're buying the service. And they're doing the same thing with the space suits, the EVA suit the spacewalking suit that I wore. NASA has contracted that out to a couple different companies, and I think eventually the space station, the International Space Station, will retire someday, and I think commercial companies will put up their own space stations. And it's just more of a commercial model of, NASA's not paying for everything. They expect the commercial companies to kind of put some of their money into it too, and NASA's not the only customer, and so it's more of a business model.
So do you see the entire space industry kind of moving more towards the commercial space entire?
Yeah, definitely.
And where do you see the space industry going from here? Like in the next 25, 50 years, what do you kind of expect to happen?
Well, I think we're definitely moving farther out. I think for I'll talk mostly about human space flight because that's really what I'm most, been working on, and what I know most about is, so I think for human space flight, obviously we want to get to the moon. We want to get back to the moon, and not just, we want to go to stay this time, to build a base and learn how to live there and learn how to mine the resources and use those resources to help us live there. But it's kind of still a stepping stone to learn how to do it in space, do it on the moon first, and then go on to Mars. So that's, hopefully we'll be there in the next, in the moon, to the moon in the next, 10 years, and then on to Mars and maybe the next 25 to 50 years. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, that's great. What opportunities do you see for people who, let's say, do not have a STEM background, for them to join the space industry?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, Carson, because I think people when they think about space, they think about either astronauts or they think about engineers, right? But there are so many other roles. I mean, it's really a big business. So it's like any business, you need accountants, you need lawyers, you need, trainers. And a lot of times those trainers may be engineers, but they could be just, think of them as teachers.
Yeah.
gosh, I mean, there's obviously engineers, but there's, really, there's finance people, there's safety people, there's security people. I mean, you got to Blue Origin, and has security people that maintain the buildings, and
Yeah.
there's there's food service people. You got to feed the people. So
Mhm.
you can be a part of a space company and contribute to getting that rocket to space without actually being somebody out there that's turning a wrench on the rocket or designing it, being an engineer. So there's really a lot of different roles that people can contribute and still be in the space business.
Yeah. I think a lot of times that people can find the entire industry kind of daunting because when they think, as you said, when they think of the space industry, they think of astronauts and people who understand rocket science. And I think it could be really reassuring to some people that you don't exactly need all of that in order to still work in the space industry. What opportunities do you see happening for people who like and more in the future because I feel like the space industry is kind of becoming more accessible within the last couple of years, even through what Blue Origin is doing with commercial space flight. But what opportunities do you see for people who maybe don't have a STEM background more recently?
Yeah, I just think that this commercial space is definitely growing. There's a lot of startup. There's other companies out there too that
Yeah.
Vast and Axiom and gosh, there's a lot of opportunities. There's smaller companies that are doing things with small satellites, rocket companies, but just other satellite companies. So there's really a ton of opportunities really out there to get involved if you're interested. And like you said, you don't have to be an aerospace engineer. You don't have to be a scientist or an astronaut to be involved in that.
Mhm. My last question is, what advice would you give people wanting to join the space industry?
So two things. One, um, do something that you love. So find what your passion is and go with that. I mean, it may be in STEM, it may be in something else. I mean, it may be in accounting or economics or finance or marketing and sales, right? That's another thing we didn't talk about. But Blue Origin has a lot of people that do marketing and sales. You have to sell seats on those rockets, right? So, um, but find what you like to do. Don't try to do something because you think that's the right thing to do because that's the way to get in. You find what you like to do and then do it well. Work hard at it because hard work is the other part of that equation. I'm sure you know that from going through school. I mean,
Yeah.
that's people that are successful put in the effort, right? You put in the work, and sure, there's people that help you along the way. And that's okay. People will help open doors for you. But once you get your foot in the door, you've got to perform and you've got to do the work to do that. So I would say, do what you love and do it well and work hard at it.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sitting down with me and having this interview. I really learned a lot, and I think a lot of people would also agree with me that you can learn a lot from your experience.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, that's all I had prepared. Do you have anything else you would like to say?
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. Say hi to your dad. Okay.
All right, thank you. Have an amazing day.
Okay. You too. Bye bye.